Very good afternoon to you. This is Sky News at 4 o'clock. Coming up on the programme today, by order of the President, a US airstrike kills Iran's most powerful general, prompting fears of reprisals. Time to leave. Australians board a fleet of Navy ships as more bushfires threaten to ignite. Vegan victory. A court grants landmark legal protection under equality laws. And seeing red, how Britain sizzled in the second hottest decade in 100 years. Very good afternoon to you. Britain is amongst those calling for a calming of tensions after the US killed Iran's most powerful military commander in an airstrike. The move, sanctioned by President Trump, came after intelligence suggested Major General Qasem Solimani was plotting to attack American diplomats. Iran's president has vowed a crushing revenge. Well, the airstrike came in the middle of the night at Baghdad International Airport on the outskirts of the Iraqi capital. Our defense and security correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
This was a swift, precise military strike that has huge, unpredictable and possibly long-term consequences. The target was one of Iran's most senior leaders. Qasem Solimani was in a convoy at Baghdad airport when it was struck by 3 American missiles in the middle of the night. His death will send shockwaves through the Middle East. Iran is now threatening a violent retaliation.
This temporary joy of the Americans and the Israelis will not last long before it turns to grief. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the people of Iran and the front of resistance throughout the geographic latitude of the Islamic world will take revenge of this proud martyr.
A Pentagon statement made clear that it was President Trump who gave the order for the assassination. General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region, it said. General Soleimani and his Quds force were responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American and coalition service members and the wounding of thousands more. President Trump's latest tweet is somewhat cryptic. Iran never won a war but never lost a negotiation, he wrote. He appears to be urging Iran to negotiate, not retaliate. The US Embassy in Baghdad has this morning urged all US citizens to leave Iraq immediately. And the British Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has released this short statement within the past few hours. We have always recognized the aggressive threat posed by the Iranian Quds force, led by Qasem Soleimani, he said. Following his death, we urge all parties to de-escalate. Further conflict is in none of our interests. Iran has announced 3 days of mourning following the killing, and emotions were on display at Friday prayers in Tehran.
This was an act of war. The Americans assassinated a senior Iranian military official, a person who was a war hero in Iran, and also a person who helped save Iraq and Syria from ISIS. So there will be severe consequences.
The assassination comes days after protesters in Baghdad attacked the US Embassy. The violence was triggered by US airstrikes on the Iraqi border, which killed 24 militia. In response, hundreds of American troops were sent to Iraq, and President Trump promised to take action if necessary. Washington believes that Iran is severely weakened through harsh sanctions, and this will harm them further still. Last night's strike, whether planned or opportunistic, would have been calculated with that in mind. Iran's response might not be immediate, but a response of some kind is all but guaranteed. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Well, tensions between the US and Iran have been escalating in the region for the past week. More than 30 rockets were launched at an Iraqi military base near Kirkuk last Friday, killing an American contractor and wounding 4 American and 3 Iraqi servicemen. US officials blamed Iranian-backed militia for the attack. US airstrikes followed in retaliation shortly afterwards at 3 locations in Iraq, Syria, killing 25 fighters of the Iran-backed militia Kateb Hezbollah. This prompted pro-Iranian militia to storm the US embassy in Baghdad on New Year's Eve, a move the US said was backed by Tehran. The protest lasted until New Year's Day. In response, 750 US soldiers are being deployed to the Middle East to bolster security. The very latest reaction for you now, live from Washington. Let's speak to our US correspondent, Amanda Walker. And Amanda, in the last hour or so, we've had an awful lot of response, haven't we, from the likes of President Trump and Mike Pompeo. What have they been saying?
Yeah, Donald Trump via tweet, which is his preferred method of communication. He is still in Florida. He has one event scheduled today, but has certainly been letting his feelings be known about this via Twitter, and also the Secretary of State. The State Department, really their view is that this has been an exercise in restraint so far when it comes to Iran, which has been sending very strong signals of behaving very provocatively in the last few months, and it feels like this is a sort of culmination really in that maximum pressure campaign, as they call it, which has been about bringing Iran to its knees economically through sanctions, and then this incredibly bold move which really does change the game in terms of the proxy war that's been going on for decades. This is a huge escalation, there is no doubt about that. But that is the view from the State Department, that so far Donald Trump has been pretty restrained in his actions until this moment. Here's the Secretary of State.
We don't seek war with Iran, but we at the same time are not going to stand by and watch the Iranians escalate and continue to put American lives at risk without responding in a way that disrupts, defends, deters. I hope that the Iranian leadership will see that, will see American resolve, and that their decision will be to de-escalate, to take actions consistent with what normal nations do. And in the event that they do not, in the event they go the other direction, I know that President Trump and the entire United States government is prepared to respond appropriately.
So the questions being asked here in Washington, was this strategy, was this always a potential part of that maximum pressure campaign, or was this more impulsive? Donald Trump is on the brink of an impeachment trial in the Senate that is looming. Is this the ultimate change of subject? He's been talking on Twitter, saying that Iran has never won a war but never lost a negotiation, so pointing towards the idea that he still wants that ultimate prize of bringing Iran to the negotiating table, which no previous president, particularly President Obama, which he is extremely fixated on his legacy and would love to achieve what he couldn't in that respect. Here's what he's been tweeting this morning. He says, General Qasem Solimani has killed or badly wounded thousands of Americans over an extended period of time and was plotting to kill many more, but got caught. He was directly and indirectly responsible for the death of millions of people, including the recent large number of protesters killed in Iran itself. While Iran will never be able to properly admit it, Soleimani was both hated and feared within the country. They are not nearly as saddened as the leaders will let the outside world believe. He should have been taken out many years ago. Lots of Republicans, as you would expect, are praising Donald Trump for this action, saying that Soleimani was an enemy of America, that Americans are ultimately safer in the wake of his death. You have Democrats not disagreeing with that, but really questioning the legality of this when you frame this as an act of war, as something that could have extremely grave consequences throughout the region. Is that something that Congress should have been able to be involved in okaying? But Donald Trump himself, as you would expect, really doubling down on this, and it's quite an interesting move politically. This isn't a name that people have necessarily heard of out there, the American voters. You know, this isn't a bin Laden or an al-Baghdadi. It's a different situation to that, but certainly it's being framed here as something that is about keeping Americans safer, and that is what's lacking at the moment, is any explanation about how Americans in the region, whether they're diplomats, whether they're military personnel, are going to be protected now that they're in this extremely dangerous environment.
Okay, Amanda, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much, Amanda Walker, live in the US for us. On to other news now. The Australian Navy has evacuated thousands of people from a fire-ravaged town in Victoria as the state declared the first state of disaster in its history. It's feared there is worse to come as well this weekend, when more hot, dry and windy weather blows in to fan the bushfires. Sky's Tom Cheshire has travelled to the remote town of Malakuta in the Victoria State, where some 4,000 people were cut off by the flames.
Finally, a way out.
We're going to wait for a little boat to come pick you up and take you to a bigger boat.
They've been stranded here, completely cut off, since Sunday, when a firestorm turned Malakuta into a hellscape. Around 1,000 people signed up for evacuation. This family had sheltered from the blaze on New Year's Eve on the beach.
Good to get away from the said heat wave. I think it's coming through. So
yeah, were you worried about what might happen again?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a potential that there could be another bushfire, so it'd be nice to go home.
So they're going out now, any sort of boat they can, ferry loads, strapping people, just get out of the way as they come past. After 5 days stranded here, this is deliverance.
This was only the beginning of their journey. It's a 20-hour voyage to their final destination, well away from the fires. But they're in good care, welcomed aboard by the Navy. Thousands of others are evacuating Victoria and New South Wales. Saturday could bring fire conditions as bad or even worse than what we've seen so far. Victoria declared a state of disaster, the first in its history. It means authorities can forcibly evacuate people.
This is a ferocious fire that is still out there, and the climatic conditions are going to be very difficult to contain that in the next 24 to 48 hours. That's why the evacuation messages are so incredibly important.
Those in Malakuta were told to bring only the bare necessities aboard. So they did. This nightmare is at least finally over. But there may be more to come. The landing craft made its way to the main ship through a blanket of smoke. The fires are still burning. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Malakuta.
Well, with the very latest for you, let's bring in Sky's Inderman Rashid. And the